You're listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio, featuring the Interactive Interview, courtesy of WrestlingEpicenter.com.
With my special guest, Bonnie Steamboat. Bonnie, how you doing?
Fine, thank you.
We've been talking for a long time. It's great to have you finally on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Before we get started into everything that's been going on with you in the past, I guess a few months now, with Ric Flair's book and everything, we were just wondering exactly how you got involved in such a crazy world of wrestling.
Well, actually, I met Rick in 1978, but I was actually a professional model, and I was hired from a modeling agency called Carolina Talent in Charlotte with another girl. They wanted a blonde and a brunette to go up to Raleigh for Crockett Promotion, which I had no idea what Crockett Promotion was. They send, a lot of times they'll send models out on events for television, and you know, we just know we're supposed to be models. We weren't actresses at the time. I was taking some acting classes since, but at the time I was just a professional model. I started modeling when I was in 1970. I went to modeling school. And so basically we went up there, we drove up there, and when we got to the studio up there, she and I both realized that it was for this, professional wrestling.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, what are we going to do here? Because of course Ric Flair and the Ricky Steamboat thing had been on TV, and everybody knew who they were in this area of Charlotte. And so I was very careful. I've always been very careful with my reputation, especially as being an attractive girl and being young and being single. I was always very careful where I went and how I behaved and so forth. And of course we were taught that in modeling school and professional development also, how to be professional. So I really wasn't real crazy about the job that I was up there to do, but I kind of just followed the other girl's lead because she had a few more years experience than I did. So we showed up at the studio, and we just waited in the lobby, and wrestlers kept walking by us and kind of looking down the hall, and we kind of knew they were kind of gawking at us a bit, and no idea what was going to happen at all. And so, the studio actually, took us into where there was a ring, a wrestling ring, and that's when we were told we were going to be standing next to Ric Flair. I can't remember the other girl's name, but she was on the left side of him, and they put me on the right side of Ric Flair, and he's right-handed. So, ironically, when he started, doing his interview about Ricky Steamboat, he pulled a photo, an 8x10 photo out, and put it over my shoulder, which is so bizarre because I had never even met Ricky Steamboat nor Ric Flair. And there he was, pointing to this picture of Ricky Steamboat with, he had sandpapered his face, and it was all, marked up and everything, and he was saying, I'm going to do this to him, and so forth. And I was trying not to laugh because it was so funny. I mean, Flair can be entertaining,
Right.
So he's very funny in a way, but I wasn't supposed to be laughing. So the other girl was telling me, don't laugh, this is supposed to be serious. And I'm like, oh, who could take this seriously?
Right.
It was really a hoot. And but I tried to be really straight-faced. And then Ricky Steamboat comes out, and he comes over to Ric Flair and punches him in the face and rips all of his clothes off down to a pair of powder blue underwear and a tie. And it pulls him into the ring. And so then, of course, the camera was off of us two girls, and I had a chance to kind of get my act together a little bit because it was really amazing, to be so close to somebody getting punched in the face.
Right.
It had never happened to me before. And so then it was over, and of course Ric Flair came back down and grabbed us girls and said he was taking us off to Las Vegas or something. He does this whole spill, with girls being his menage a trois, going off in a Learjet or whatever. But in fact, that was the first time I had ever met either one of those two. And I had a boyfriend in Raleigh in a band called Nantucket, which all those wrestling fans that are from Raleigh would know who that band is. The guy actually picked me up and from the studio, and we spent the weekend up there. So From what I understand, Ric Flair says that he took me home, but he might have taken the other girl home. But I don't know how he could confuse a tall blonde with a short brunette, you know. So that's kind of, I don't know where that rumor got started, but it is totally false.
That actually was going to be the next question. But you just mentioned that everybody in the Charlotte area knew who Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair was. Did you?
Oh, yeah, from watching them on television, yeah. You know, you couldn't turn a channel without, seeing them on TV. And in fact, you know, being single and going out, you know, you did run into them occasionally. I remember one time they were at a big nightclub. That they were there with two other girls. I guess they were their girlfriends or wives at the time. I don't know. But, you know, of course, you know, with Ric Flair walking in with that white hair and the way he, you know, he's so arrogant and flamboyant, you know, he wants everybody to know he's there. It's hard to be in a club and not know that Ric Flair is there.
In Ric Flair's book, he mentions that you are, quote, not Elizabeth. How do you compare yourself to Elizabeth?
Oh, I would never compare myself to Elizabeth. Elizabeth and I are totally different people. She was such a sweetheart. We had several times being on the road together and being backstage to talk, but Savage did try to keep us apart. He did not want her talking to anyone, not just me, but he wouldn't. She told me on two occasions that that on an airplane that he would not let her sit in the middle seat, although there was more room for him to sit on the window seat, because he did not want somebody to sit in the middle and talk to her. Now, she told me that herself, and that she was feeling very claustrophobic, you know, in that relationship.
Right.
And I felt really sorry for her. I loved Elizabeth. She was a sweetheart. And another time, she told me that that she couldn't go to the grocery store alone. He would not even let her go to the grocery store alone. And I know that he locked her in a room, in the locker rooms.
Didn't he used to lock?
None of the guys could get to her. Nobody could talk to her.
Yes, Sherry Martel told the story saying that he locked her in closets. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I know what Elizabeth told me. And, you know, she would try to squeeze out a few words to me, and I really looked at it like she was trying to reach out for help. And I know that she did tell me also that she weighed like 300 pounds when Savage met her at a health club, and he got her to lose weight. So she probably didn't have much discipline in her life and low self-esteem, and he found her and created her into the Elizabeth that she was when all the fans saw her. But I think inside her, there was a lot of stress and a lot of pressure that he put on her. And I think a lot of that has to do with the years and years and years later, you know, her having that only identity and staying in the industry. I think she tried to, when she divorced Savage, I think she married an attorney for a while, and I wish that had worked out for her, because she would probably still be alive today. But I don't blame Lex Luger on her death at all. I think that started way before Lex Luger. I know a lot of people are blaming Lex Luger that, you know, because he has the gym and possibly, you know, over too many supplements or whatever was going on in that relationship. I don't know. But I know Lex Luger, and he was a good guy. I knew him when he was married to his first wife, and his had two beautiful children, and he is an upstanding fellow. And it just hurt me really bad to hear bad things about him concerning Elizabeth. Because, you know, they were both good people. You know, this industry is a tough industry, and the entertainment industry in general, not just professional wrestling, but professional wrestling really is kind of the toughest and roughest and crudest of all the entertainment on television. And I'm not saying that there isn't a place for that in society. I like to keep an open mind. I certainly loved all the fans. I know Rick did. And you really get down to the nitty-gritty, hard-working people in America when you go to those events. And I always enjoyed it. In fact, we took a couple of wrestling fans with us on pay-per-view events because they were so dedicated to Rick. And I felt very close to a lot of them. And I still have, you know, a huge drawer full of fan mail. And one of these days I want to put them all in a directory kind of thing and send them all, you know, updated pictures on Richie and Rick. And I doubt they want really anything from me. I've always been just kind of like a secretary for Rick, organizing paperwork and things like that. But, you know, I was always happy to be in the background. My whole thing was never to be in the foreground or in the ring.
Right.
And that was only at the insistence of McMahon and Linda McMahon.
Right.
And Ric Flair, by the way.
Another thing Ric Flair says that kind of ties in with what you were just saying is that George Scott got tired of having you around and said to, quote, get rid of her. Do you believe George would have made this comment?
Absolutely not. In fact, when I actually never even bought Ric Flair's book. I had several loyal fans email me and tell me what was in the book. And I had my grandchildren out. I have 2 grandchildren, Tristan and Hayden. One is 6 and one is 4 now. From my first marriage, and I had a daughter from her. Her name is Tanya. But I was at the bookstore and with my grandchildren, and they were reading books, and I happened to pick it up, and I said, okay, I'm going to look on page 179 because that's where they told me it was. And, and when I read that, I was just appalled because I have dozens of pictures of George and I and his wife and Rick, and we went on trips together, and we just love each other. And I knew that George Scott never said that. So I actually called him up, and his wife was like, what? She literally called Ric Flair a whore, because she feels like he'd sell himself to anybody to get approval. And she felt like that because of our lawsuit against Vince McMahon and protecting our trademark, and the fact that the WWE did not like me in Rick's life for that reason. I just did basically paperwork and would call the office and ask where residuals were, and because of that, I basically got blacklisted, and so did Rick.
Right.
But that's just the way they do business, and it was not something I was used to, so I really kind of got in bad favor that way. Most in the entertainment industry that I had been in as a professional model, you got paid regularly. It wasn't the chef's surprise, and if you were on an endorsement, you got paid for it. So this was all new to me when I came into Rick's life, and so. Anyway, did I get off track there? I wasn't sure.
No, not really. The next question is, why do you feel Ric Flair dislikes you so much and seems to like Rick so much? That is Ricky Steamboat, your ex-husband, not himself.
Well, that really started back when I first met Rick, because my Rick was married twice before me. And the second wife broke up his first marriage. And the second wife, her name is Susan, is best friends with Ric Flair's wife, Beth.
Right.
And so Susan left Rick for his workout partner, and then Rick was all alone, and he actually contacted the modeling agency where I worked and taught professional modeling, and he knew the secretary there, and she brought a bunch of modeling pictures over to him, and he picked mine. And he said, I know this girl from somewhere, and he had remembered me from that audition back in 1978.
Wow. And what year was this?
Let's see, that was when Rick and I met was 85. 84. It was 1984 because we got married in 85. So it was in the fall of 84. And so naturally right away, Susan wanted Rick back, and Beth and Ric Flair tried to get him back with her. They even offered Rick and Susan to reconciliate their marriage a trip to Hawaii, and offered that but Rick had to break up with me, and Rick refused. So right away, Ric Flair didn't like me because, he tried, and I didn't like him at that point because Rick told me that he was trying to break our relationship up. And so that was really the beginning of it. And from that point on, there were little things that Ric Flair did, that were not acceptable for me to hang out with him, or my family to hang out with him and his family. It was, there was just a major difference in personalities.
Bret the Hitman Hart offered a response to Ric Flair's book almost immediately after it was released. I actually sent you this. What is your opinion of Bret, and what did you think of his response?
I love Bret Hart. I thought he was a great guy, honorable, integrity. He really was a great talent, too. I mean, I would watch him from backstage, and he gave his heart out. He reminded me so much of Rick, of my Rick, Ricky Steamboat.
Right.
And I was really hurt, when he had to go through all of that with Vince, and I thought he did a great job on the documentary that they did.
Right.
And I just love Bret. He's always been a gentleman. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, anytime he ever saw me. or anybody else. He's always been a gentleman. His family's wonderful. They've sent me, Christmas pictures year after year, and Owen and his wife Martha too. They've sent me pictures, and we tried to really build a family, something. A lot of people backstage, we tried to build a normal life for everybody so that we could all keep in touch with each other's families and so forth. It was very, very difficult to keep family together traveling that much on the road.
At WrestleMania IV, Rick carried Richie to the ring, your son, for those who don't know. What were the circumstances that made him do so?
Well, at that point, Rick had won the belt at WrestleMania III, and Vince was after Rick to sign a contract for perpetuity to give up his name, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. And, of course, Rick and I didn't feel like Vince McMahon's grandchildren should have it. We felt like our grandchildren should have it.
Right.
So Rick wouldn't sign it, and Vince kept giving him contracts, but it said the same thing. For perpetuity, we had to give up the name. If Vince would have taken the time to just negotiate that, Rick would probably have would have gone on and signed the contract. But Rick was advised by his attorney not to do it, and I just supported that decision. And the sad thing is that because he wouldn't sign that contract, when it was time for the next WrestleMania, of course, my Rick was really under a lot of stress because he was like, what's Vince going to do to me,
Right.
Am I going to be able to carry the belt on? I deserve it, I worked hard for it. I love the fans. I gave the fans 150% every time I go out there. And but we kind of knew that there would be some kind of repercussion. So then when he was I think it was Atlantic City, he was with the Honky Tonk. Something was going on with the Honky Tonk man up there, and he had to drop the belt to the Honky Tonk. And then I think it was WrestleMania IV after was coming up with Greg the Hammer. And we knew kind of by then. And so I took my mother along, and I decided that if Vince did make Rick lose, that he could take our little baby out, who was 5 months old at the time, and I would make a little outfit in secret that matched Rick's, and that nobody could kill him off with a baby in his arms. And so I took my mother with us, and I took the baby up there, and I had the little outfit packed in my suitcase, and we got to the event, and Rick went backstage, and I told my mother, I said, let's go down to the concessions and see if there's any T-shirts on Rick for sale, because if there isn't, then he's going to have to do a job tonight. And I said, I want to go back up and be with him and tell him that, he could take the baby out. And so we went down there, and of course there were nothing down there, and I knew. So I said, Mom, wait here. So I went back to backstage trying to catch him before all the, excitement started up, and he was walking to me at the same time I was walking toward him. It was like Romeo and Juliet, and we both knew. And he got to me, and he hugged me, and he said, they're going to make me lose tonight. And I said, I knew it. And I said, listen, Rick, I said, I've got, the baby's outfit, it matches yours. I'm going to hand you the baby when you have to do that, and you hold that baby up to all those fans, and you let them know that this is the reason why, you wanted your name for your son, and one day they'll read about it. And so you go ahead and you hold your head up, and you do what you have to do in your job, but you know that belt is being taken away from you because you didn't sign a contract. And one day the fans will know it. And so he took Richie out there. I handed Richie to him, and he held him up in his palm of his hand. The 20,000 people there, and I don't know how many people on television. And it was really sweet, and so to me it was like it was our gift to the fans, that we believe in you, and Rick loves you, and here's our baby to prove it, and so goodbye. We thought that was really going to be the end of his career up there.
How would you compare the NWA to the WWF in terms of the revenue and size of the companies?
The NWA and the WWF?
Yes.
Well, that was a major difference. That is true. I got to tell you that when Rick went from the NWA to the WWF, it was amazing. There's no doubt about that. I will say this: when we first went up there and experienced the WWF experience, when you're sitting there, at a taping for Toyota, and Cyndi Lauper's sitting there talking, and she runs down for a job boy because he forgot his gym bag, upstairs. And she's running down on the streets of New York City to give a $50 job boy his bag. I mean, she's a real person. I mean, you're experiencing these cool things that were happening. And I was turned to Rick. I said, wow, this is the big time. And there we are at the 65th floor of the Rockefeller Hotel with Liberace and, all these other stars. And you sitting there going, wow, this guy really is a brilliant promoter. And I have to give Vince credit for that. I mean, he did pull that together. But what happened after that became so, I don't know what happened, he was so disoriented. I mean, he got power hungry or something.
Right.
And, and then he didn't care who he stepped on to get where he needed to go. And it was an experience, I tell you. There's no doubt about it, and I won't take that away from Vince. That first WrestleMania was amazing. It was really amazing, coming from the NWA.
Right.
But I will tell you, in the NWA too, I mean, Rick didn't make, all the guys in the NWA didn't make much money. I mean, Crockett would make them sign their paycheck on the back. And Crockett himself made over $300,000 on posters on Ricky Steamboat, and Rick never got a dime because on the back of his paycheck it said, "You give up all rights to any of your merchandise."
Wow.
So in order to cash his check for the week for whatever it was, I'm not sure at that time. I could look back in the records because I have all of those records too. But it was like Rick never got anything out of that. So the whole industry, whether it was the NWA or the WWF or whatever, was used to taking advantage of the wrestlers, tremendously. They never got their due. That's why I have so much love for the old timers. They really took a beating in their life, and they never got any, 401ks or any health insurance, and a lot of them are broken and broke, and they're trying to pull together in the Cauliflower Alley, and I love that organization. Rick and I are both members to it. I adore the history, and I respect all of those old timers and the history of professional wrestling because, man, they had such talent and such a life, and they told such a story, and the fans, were different then. And
right.
I just don't think now the fans really respect the art form of professional wrestling like it started out to be.
You just mentioned that Rick never signed the contract due to advice from his lawyer. It seems to me that Flair almost seems to blame you for that, saying that you cost him a bundle of money. Do you have any response to that?
Oh, well, of course, that's so unfair. And in fact, it was the attorney, basically, that we had Ricky Steamboat already trademarked, and he was the one that told us that we should have the dragon because it was attached to the name while Rick was working. And I was designing all the costumes, and I was hiring talent, and I mean, I did all of it, and Rick was using it, and so it was now attached to his name. So it was the attorney, Bob Carney, who actually trademarked that for us to put with Ricky Steamboat. So it wasn't my idea at all. It had to do with, the legalities of Vince's contracts are very, boy, they are stretching it. I mean, he covers everything in there.
Right.
The boys basically don't own anything when they're done, when they leave there. And
right.
and if there's no guarantee on any salary, it's like the chef's surprise. Very few guys ever got a salary that was guaranteed. It was just like you just never knew what you were going to get, and on residuals too.
Yeah, Jake Roberts told us a story that his sister was dating one of the guys that was in the concession stands, and he found out exactly how many shirts he had sold, and that Vince told him that he only sold 10, and he really sold about 500, and basically he only got paid for half sold 10 in residuals. So, I mean, that tells you what they were doing in terms of what they were actually paying you compared to what you were actually making for them.
Well, we still have a dear friend in Canada who licensed Rick's name and was told on the contract that Rick was going to get a $5,000 upfront payment, and then and we never got a dime. And we ended up talking to him. He's my friend. In fact, I just saw him this past week to this day. But he came into it as a licensee of the WWF at the time. and we never got that money. Then we were told that that Walt Disney was trying to reach Rick, and finally the vice president of Walt Disney, Mitch Ackerman, called our house, got our phone number, and he said, I've been trying to get a hold of you, and he said, the WWE just keeps telling us that the only one that's available is Hulk Hogan, and he said, we want you. And we were like, what? So, he was the office was making sure only certain people got certain jobs, so that was not fair. And then, when we did the toy fair up in Canada, we met the owners of Grand Toys at the time, who put the first toys out, the dolls out on, the action figures out on the wrestlers.
Right.
And he told us at the Christmas event that Rick's doll sold more than Hulk Hogan's in Canada, and that he was sending a $20 million check to the WWF, the end of the year check, So he said, your next residual check should be big. Well, we were getting our residual checks quarterly.
Right.
And I started thinking, well, how can Vince pay quarterly when they're sending the money in all at one time at the end of the year? I mean, I heard that directly from the owner of Grand Toys. And so then I started calling Doug Sages at the office, and of course that didn't get Rick any points. And and of course, we had no one else. I mean, we could have hired an attorney. We didn't want to go that way with it. We wanted to be cordial with the office. We just needed some answers. And Rick was busy doing what he does. He was an entertainer, so I did the office work, the paperwork in the family, And I got blamed for a lot of things just because I was keeping up with the records. But, we meant no harm. We would have been glad. Rick did not want to leave the WWF. We would have been glad to negotiate with Vince, but we did not want to give up Rick's name. We felt like our son deserved it just as much as Vince's son deserved it. I mean, why should they own his name?
Right.
Rick was Ricky Steamboat years before he ever went to the WWF.
Right.
So anyway, that's kind of how that happened. And I will tell you this, that when we were up there at the beginning, the whole plan was for Hulk Hogan, Roddy Piper, and Ricky Steamboat to be on a mural in the brand new office when they moved from Greenwich to Stamford, or Stamford to Greenwich. I can't remember which one it was, but wherever the office is now, it was the other place that they had made these plans. And
they're in Stamford now.
So have this big mural, on it. And so the plans were, George Scott was there at the time. He's the one that hired Rick to go up to the WWF, and he loved Rick. And he had plans for Hogan to drop the belt to Rick. And that's why they had these three, great superstars on this mural wall. And when Hogan heard about it, from what the rumor is that Hogan and a few other people, Bobby Heenan and a few other, they called them the Minnesota Connection or something like that. There was some few people that we're sticking with Hogan, and, if you do this, we're leaving. And so they ended up, George and Vince McMahon, parting ways, even though to this day, George and Vince are good friends. They love each other. And it broke Vince's heart to have to let George go. But George, they felt like George had some outdated ideas, and they didn't think Ricky Steamboat should be the world champion. So George basically left on his own from the WWF for that reason. So after that happened, we knew that, Rick's time as far as a superstar at the WWF was over, and that we were going to struggle from that point on, and that's basically what it was. It was a struggle.
In our interview with Rick mentioned that sometimes he felt like you may have been putting him between a rock and a hard place. Any response to what he said?
Oh, yeah, because, I think what Rick is talking about is he just recently got married, like last week, and we almost got married again 3 months ago. He and I were living together again. So our marriage broke up and back together and broke up. And his new wife, within 48 hours, was calling here saying, making some demands, and I asked her to have Rick call me. And so I think he's put in the middle, and I'm sure it's an uncomfortable place for him to be, but then I have, my privacy, and, she has to respect my space and my home and my conversations, too, with her, and I have by calling up and, demanding that I set up a time for Rick to pick up his clothes and, personal things like that. And I have no problem with that, but then she went on to say something about, well, when do we get a weekend with Richie and, my son? And I was like, you know what, Rick has that whole calendar, and, I really don't think this is a good conversation, so just have Rick call me. Hopefully all those things will work out, and her and I will get along a little better, but, she needs to go through Rick for those kind of things.
Right. What do you feel is the biggest misconception about Bonnie Steamboat?
Oh, my goodness. Well, the people that really know me, they know that I'm a sharp cookie.
Right.
They know that, I'm loyal to Rick, true blue, 150%, that there's nothing I've ever done that wasn't, in my heart, best interest for Rick. And he's loved me for it, too. I mean, we were married 20 years, for heaven's sakes,
Right.
Had a lot of wonderful times. I've got, thousands of pictures of us kissing and hugging. And, I think maybe, people were a little jealous of that relationship. We were really close. I mean, Rick insisted on me traveling with him before he went to the WWF. I mean, that's how he felt. He did not want this marriage to break up. And we did a good job keeping it together for 20 years. People change. We still love each other. We still are under stress. We're still, following that, Ricky and Bonnie Steamboat thing. But we love the fans, and, any way we can, I try to send autographs out to people. And if they will email to bsteamboat@aol.com, they can, I'll try to get an autograph picture out to them. Or they can email Rick at rsteamboat@aol.com. and give him a personal message, and I'll make sure it gets to him.
Wow. Well, that's a great message to get out to the fans. You guys should, open a website so you can sell the autographs and such and get some more revenue.
Well, we should do that. We might do that in the near future. I do have somebody that's interested in putting up a website for us, so that would be great. We probably will do that. Thank you for that idea.
All right, before we close up, do you mind if we give you some word associations? You can either, if you have a story to tell, you can feel free. If you just want to give a one-word answer, that's fine too.
Okay, sure.
First name on the list is Vince McMahon.
I was telling, when I talked to George and Gene about the other day about this Ric Flair book and how silly the whole thing was on his comments, everything in there, what he's talking about, I know about me, is a lie. And I'm happy he said some nice things about Rick, because my Rick certainly deserves it.
Right.
But, George Scott, loves Vince McMahon. And so I had to tell his wife, Jean, I said, I got to know that there's something good about Vince McMahon because George loves him. So
right.
I try not, I'm like, I've never seen that side of him, but, I don't know. I think sometimes now when he looks in the mirror at himself, I think he's probably seen a lot of mistakes he's made along the way, and I don't know whether he really can like himself or not for all the unhappiness that he's brought on the boys in the business.
Right.
And I'd be hard-pressed to think that he'd be proud of that. Everywhere in the world, he's kind of made a fool of his family on camera, on television, and himself, and if that's what matters to him, the almighty dollar, then then he's been a success in his life, I guess. But, I just think his business practices were unfair, not just to Rick, my Rick, because we've been able to survive it all. My Rick, got by on his talent. I mean, he was tremendously talented, just tremendously talented. I would just be in awe, and I'd watch him, walk out from the curtain to the crowd. And I would just go, my God, he belongs to those fans. Those fans love him, and he loves them. And, he's nobody's but theirs when he walked out there. I mean, it was magical. It was just amazing. And I would have to, pinch myself to say, this guy, I'm married to this guy. But Rick was never a prima donna. He'd come back out of that stage, and he's the same person. He's never been affected by who he was or had to falsely advertise himself to anybody. He really was the real deal. Now, Ric Flair, we've been told by airline stewardesses at the airport that he pages himself so everybody knows he's there, He has to have that adoration all the time. He's got to be dancing on a table with his pants off, doing something, to be entertaining or whatever, you know, in life, you know, to get his attention, to be satisfied. But my Rick boy, he just loved the fans.
Well, Ric Flair and I had a little confrontation on the air that people still are talking about, so that was a fun little experience.
Well, you know, he doesn't like to hear the truth too much. He likes to, you know, candy coat everything and make it so he's more of a, you know, out of anybody I've ever met my whole life, he's probably the biggest opportunist and manipulator I have ever met.
Wow.
Yeah, and I have a couple of stories about him. And other reasons why I don't like him is that.
You'll save that for your own books.
Huh?
I said you could save that for books and such.
Oh, okay, I'll do that. Okay. Okay, so you know, Linda McMahon, she was great. I loved their kids. Shane was just a cute little thing, and I don't remember too much about Stephanie being around, but I liked them. You know, I liked her. I liked Vince at first, until he started being, you know, really hard on Rick, and you know, that kind of thing. But
how about some?
I don't know. I'd have a hard time thinking that he's happy with who he is. I mean, he's made a lot of money, but like I said, you know, if he has to get up in the morning and look at the mirror at himself, I don't see how he could be really proud of what he's done. But,
how about somebody we shockingly lost last year, Road Warrior Hawk?
oh boy, did I love him. He was so sweet. He and his wife went to Japan with Rick and I, and we had the best time. He was another real guy. You know, he was a hard worker. He was big. He's like a big teddy bear, you know.
Right.
I just adored him, and he just said it like it was. He was a lot of fun.
Right.
I will miss him too, thinking that he's not around anymore. And Junkyard Dog, oh, I loved him. He was such a sweetheart. He was just like a big teddy bear too. He was a fun person.
Are you looking at the same list I am? Because that was actually the next name on the list.
Oh, was he? I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, he was a good guy too. Who was the next one that I had? There was another guy that we lost. Oh, that's right, Hercules Hernandez.
Oh, and I loved Herc too. He was a lot of fun, and he was really kind. You know, it was like because Rick was under stress and not signing that contract, all the guys at the top of the list would kind of avoid me and Rick. And it was really unfair for Rick because he had to deal with that stress. But all the underneath guys, oh boy, they were there for us. You know, they were always talking to us, always, you know, being kind, because they didn't get any heat, and they weren't worried about their position in the business. But you know, all the guys at the top 10, you know, guys who were trying to take Rick's place, were ready to stab him in the back, you know, or they just wouldn't talk to him, or you know, they just didn't want to be caught talking to him because they would be in bad favor with Vince. Because, you know, Rick got basically blacklisted because he didn't sign the contract. He'd get put, you know, in Lizard Lick, Montana instead of, you know, Madison Square Garden, you know, and the pay would, of course, would be accordingly, you know. So it was, everybody knew the heat was on Ricky Steamboat, and if he could do it to Ricky Steamboat, he could do it to anybody. And that was exactly the message Vince was putting out to the boys. So it was hard. It was really hard for Rick to deal with having to go to all those towns and getting, you know, shunned like that.
How about Bobby Heenan? Well,
you know, Bobby Heenan never really had any time, and I never really talked to him personally at all. There was one event that I was pregnant with Richie, and we got there early. We always got to the building early, and a lot of times I left, but this time I stayed, and Howard Finkel's girlfriend was reading magazines in one of the rooms, the side rooms there, the dressing rooms. And she asked me to come in and read magazines with her, and I said, okay. And she asked me about how I was doing in my pregnancy and everything. Well, and it had Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon and somebody else on her door. And she was in there to do makeup, I guess, for them. And so as soon as, you know, Bobby Heenan came to the door, I turned to her and I said, you know, I got to go. So I walked out because I always avoided, you know, the staff. I knew they were there to work, and I was a professional person, so I understood that. So I went out and I sat on the bleachers. And all of a sudden she comes back around. Her name was Kathy. Kathy, I think she married Howard Finkel, by the way. And she comes back around and she said, that blank, 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 Bobby Heenan, she said, he, you know, blank, 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 blank. She said, you know, you know what he said? And I said, no, what? And she said he can't even scratch his blank without you being around. And I couldn't believe it. I was so hurt because the thing I hated was that I would never want to cause any more heat for Rick. He was already under enough stress because he didn't sign that contract, you know?
Right.
So I started crying. I was pregnant. I was 5 months, 6 months pregnant. And she was trying to, you know, console me. She said, oh, don't worry about him. He's nobody, you know. She would try to cover for it because she knew I didn't do anything. I'd left as soon as he popped his head in the door.
Right.
And so then Rick comes walking out, and he had just had the belt, you know, from WrestleMania IV.
Right.
A few months, I guess, and he was carrying it with him. He was so proud of that belt. And he came over. He said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Oh, it's Bobby Heenan. You know, he said this, this, and this." I didn't even tell Rick. She did. And and I was trying to stop crying, you know, and so he goes back to the back and he goes right to Vince and he said, "You better tell that Bobby Heenan, you know, to quit, you know, treating my wife that way, you know, or saying things about my wife like that. She just walked in there." Well, apparently Rick got heat for that because Bobby Heenan and Vince are very tight. And, you know, Heenan is still around. Ricky Steamboat isn't, so that tells you how tight they are with Vince. So my Rick got blamed for something, and in fact, I would get sabotaged like that. A couple of times I got sabotaged like that where they would purposely make it look like I did something so that I would be in bad favor with Vince to get Rick in trouble. So they would use me. Other boys would use me. Those people at the top that were jealous of Rick or the Minnesota Connection or whatever they were, to get me in bad favor. And, you know, another time I was at an event I can't remember it was, and she got me some tickets again, and she had 2 tickets, and I never sat in the front row. I always just sat wherever I could and didn't make a scene or anything. I just tried to stay away from the crowd.
Right.
And she asked me to sit with her, and it was in the front row, and it was the match between Jake and Rick.
Right.
And when something happened with Rick, and he was DDT'd on the mat.
Right.
And when that happened, I was in the front row, and all of a sudden one of the fans stood up beside me, and she said, "That's Ricky Steamboat's wife." And the other guy, and he's hurt. And the other lady said, no, because if it was, she wouldn't be sitting right here. And I was sitting there going, oh my God, what do I do? What would the company want me to do?
Right.
I'm in the middle of, you know, a sold-out house in the front row.
Right.
So I'm like, if I went up the stairs, I have no idea how to get backstage, and they don't know who I am, so I couldn't get backstage. And so I slid by I got up, and I acted like I was surprised, which I was. I had no idea how hurt he really was.
Right.
But, you know, I went down the side railing where I knew where the backstage was. And the next, and so I left, you know, because I felt like that's what the company would expect me to do. And so the next event we went to, the next television, Rick and I come in the back door, and Gorilla Monsoon's standing there, and he said, "She's not allowed in the building." And I turned to Rick, I said, and Rick turned to me, he goes, "What?" He said, "She's not allowed in the building." And they didn't give us any reason why. No reason. And I said, "Okay, Rick, I'll go back to the hotel, whatever. You know, I'll go back to the hotel." So I went back to the hotel and cried myself to sleep for like.
Did that stick?
So he got back out of the event. And I didn't find out till weeks later that Vince McMahon was told that I got up on purpose to get on camera, to go back through that hallway, and that I purposely did that to try to catch myself on camera. And that's the reason they wouldn't let me in the building. And that was so untrue. Nobody gave me a chance to explain myself, nothing. They never, ever, it was like they tried to sabotage, you know, Rick and I. And at that point, it was so pathetic and so sad, and Rick and I were so miserable on the road. He was disgusted with the business. He loved the fans. You know, he wanted to be there for the fans. He loved the fans, and they loved him. But, you know, his hands were tied with the promotion, and there was nothing more that we could really do. So basically, he just told, you know, Vince he wanted to quit. He wanted to go home, and you can't blame the guy. You know, it was tough. It was tough being that political structure was really tough.
Got a couple more names for you. How about Dusty Rhodes? Dusty Rhodes.
I don't know too much about Dusty, but I do know that that whenever Dusty was around, Rick was always put down the card, and I know that made Rick unhappy. So I don't think that Dusty liked Rick very much. I think he had his own group of a clique, just kind of like Hogan did. And when Dusty went somewhere, that clique went with him, and no one else could get by it. So it was kind of like a power struggle. And so we always knew wherever Dusty was that, you know, Rick was not going to get much credit or get good events or places, you know. And, of course, it was much more satisfying for Rick when he could really show his talent and get a good response from the crowd. And, of course, Dusty wanted all the response. He didn't want Rick, you know, getting all the accolades and the applause.
Well, right.
So, you know, it was hard for him whenever Dusty was around.
You mentioned him a couple of times. How about Hulk Hogan?
Well, you know, Terry, you know, he got into a position, and he wasn't about to let go of that. And no one could challenge it. And when it was challenged by George Scott to put, you know, Rick as a world champion, that was really booted down real fast. And from that point on, he basically became tough for even Vince to handle. And I think he and Vince, you know, had some. They had a partnership, but they also had disagreements on things. And I can remember one time Hogan's wife telling me that, you know, if Vince was going to put more pressure on Hogan, he was just going to leave and work as I think they even had the name then Hollywood Hogan. And she said he would just turn bad guy and leave. And eventually that's what he ended up doing. But you know, so there was a little pressure on Hogan, but he basically was the kingpin there. You know, he made the decisions, and Vince basically, he had created a monster, and nobody else was going to be world champion than him. And so all the money went into making him the champion, and you know, it probably was a good thing for professional wrestling in the long run. I mean, it's, you know, I don't know, sometimes, you know, with Ricky Steamboat, because his father was in the military, and you know, Rick has honor and integrity, and he has so many, you know, strong attributes when it comes to loyalty and all of that kind of stuff. And that whole business just isn't centered around any kind of things, you know, morality like that.
Right.
So it was never a good fit for Rick, although he loved the fans.
Right.
You know, and it wasn't a good fit for me either. Rick and I were alike in that way. You know, we really held ourselves, you know, responsible for our behavior. And that's why you'll never see any bad stories about us, you know, on the road or whatever. You know, we just didn't get involved with the partying thing.
Right. Right. So I take it you don't miss the business?
I do miss the fans. You know that? That was the part I loved the most, is because, you know, there's such an eclectic group of fans out there, and they had such good hearts, especially in the South, you know, from down here. I didn't get to know and in Canada. I love the fans in Canada. I mean, you know, but, you know, the ones in Boston and Detroit where they would throw, you know, steelies and darts down at the wrestlers, and they were kind of tough. And there was one time when we were at Madison Square Garden, and I was pregnant with Richie. That was when Rick won the belt.
Right.
No, it was another time whenever he was, I think he was fighting Morocco.
Right.
But we were at that event, and I was still pregnant, and we came outside, and it was right when the fans were changing from at Madison Square Garden, or maybe they were always like that, but this time it seemed like they wanted the bad guy to win. And Rick came down, and we got in a cab because nobody ever parks there. There's no parking, so we had to go to a parking garage. So we took a cab to this parking garage, and we got in this cab, and the fans came out at the same time, and they started rocking the cab back and forth on two wheels and slamming beer cans into the windshield. And I'm in there pregnant, and the cab driver turns to us and he goes, "Get out." He said, "This is a new cab."
Oh, God.
You got to get out. This cab is going to ruin my cab. And I'm like, and Rick goes, "My wife is pregnant. You're kidding me. You know, move a few, you know, miles per hour here. We got to get going."
Right.
And finally, you know, the cab driver went through the crowd, but, you know, it was pretty scary.
Ugh, that's not good at all. Wow. And the last name on the list, and we've talked about him in length and for good reason, Ricky Steamboat?
Well, Ricky Steamboat, he's the love of my life. The father of my son, and we had a 20-year marriage, and we're still good friends. We still love each other. We may not be in love, but we love each other, and sometimes it's hard. That world was tough to live in, but we made it through, and we want the best for our son, and that's all we've ever wanted. And our son does have that Ricky Steamboat name now. That's his trademark. He has a young race car driver, and he races under Richie Steamboat. He's got his own business, and he also goes to school. This is his third year as a varsity football player at high school. He's been recruited to Wake Forest for football, and he's also been 4-time North Carolina amateur wrestling champion. And
wow.
There's a lot of reasons why anyway, there's more stories, but you have to read the book.
Right.
We've got a book coming out, Rick and I. Rick's got an autobiography that we're working on right now, and my good friend here, James, is going to be the editor chief, and we're trying to get that thing put together so all you fans can have a chance to read about Rick in his early childhood and through high school and college and right into the professional ranks up to today.
Well, we can't thank you enough for your time. This was absolutely incredible, and I think a lot of people that did not know where you stood on issues now will, and I think that's a good thing, because I think a lot of people that read Rick's book got an ugly picture of you, and having read Rick's book and knowing you, I can tell you that the picture he painted is nowhere near the person I know. So.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to reach the fans. They're the important ones to Rick and to me.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and stay tuned for more from the Interactive Interview.